QSO Today, episode 196, Jim Millner WB2REM. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, who leads the way in their spring savings promotional, where you can get up to a $200 rebate on selected products. Click on the ICOM Spring Promotions link in this week's show notes page. We are also sponsored this week by QRP Labs, my favorite amateur radio kit company. If you're looking for exciting state-of-the-art amateur radio kits, check out QRP Labs. Your support of both ICOM and QRP Labs is the best way to support QSO Today. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth for Z1UG, your host. Jim Millner WB2REM came to my attention in a QST magazine article that he co-wrote with Gene Hinkle, K5PA, in April 2017 edition on do-it-yourself remote radio. For many of us who live either in HOA covenant neighborhoods or places with high noise levels, the idea of a remotely controlled low-band station on a quiet mountaintop is a cool idea. Frankly, this idea is frequently on my mind. Jim has an interesting ham radio story and, of course, shares with us some of his remote control insight in this QSO Today. WB2REM, this is Eric for Z1UG. Are you there, Jim?
For Z1UG, this is WB2REM. Good day, Eric.
Jim, thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, it started when I was quite young, around 8 years old. Both my brother and I were interested in building to some extent, and a friend of ours down the block, his parents had a dry cleaners, and in the dry cleaners, they used the CB radio to communicate with their trucks, and he showed us a CB radio, and we fooled around with that a little bit. And then we went to Lafayette Radio, local in the Trenton, New Jersey area, and purchased a CB walkie-talkie kit at 8 and 9 years old. My brother and I, we decided to put this kit together and build our own walkie-talkie on CB. And basically, that was the beginning of our entry into the realms of radio. It wasn't until the next year or a year after when my brother and I went to sleepover camp in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania called Pocono Highlands. And at the camp, they had one of the activities was amateur radio. And it really exposed us to one of the areas that we're really interested in. And at that time, my brother was 10 and I was 9. And he was able to acquire his novice license shortly after camp had finished. We bought a radio to start with, a DX40 and a 40-watt CW transmitter and an NC188 receiver. And that was our first rig. It was until I was 11 years old that I took my exam, my novice exam, and that's an interesting story in itself. We were cruising around our neighborhood on our bicycles, and we came across a guy in a convertible who had a mobile antenna and a Drake Twins, one of the first, I think, smaller type Drake transmitter receiver combination. This is in 1963 when I was first licensed, and met him, and his call was K2OJL, and he became my mentor. His name was Jim Zimskin. Jim was a character in itself, and he was about 10 years older than us, but a very wild guy. He ended up moving to Belize in his later years and got the call Victor 31 Bravo Bravo. And if you want to find out what I mean about he was sort of an unusual guy, there are audio clippings of him. He died when he was 48 years old a number of years ago, but there are audio tapings on the air already right now that you can listen to some of his communications. So I received my license at age 11, and then at that time, your novice only lasted for a year. It was 75 watts power and CW and crystal controlled. And I remember that in the beginning of this process of my novice, I got into some trouble with my father. And as a consequence, I can't even remember what the incident was, but he took away my key. And that was a traumatic experience at the age of 11, and you only had 1 month to operate the radio. And he took the key out of the system, and I was left with just a radio and nothing to transmit with. But so after about 3 weeks of being upset about it, I decided I wasn't going to let that ruin me, and I decided to start learning how to send CW with touching two wires together. And for a good 4 months of my novice license, I made over 1,000 contacts with touching wires together.
Did your brother remain a ham?
He is a ham. His call is now K2DON. He was WA2VBN, so his name is Don, so he got the call K2DON. But he was the fixer, and I was the operator, as it turned out. So he rarely got on the air, but I got on the air, and maybe I monopolized it. And likewise, we did a lot of building, and in the building, we built a Heathkit tour at that age, 10, 11 years old, and I was basically his gopher, and he was the builder. And that's how our relationship developed. And I ended up just being mainly the operator, and he was a builder, and I really felt I really didn't have competency in the electronic areas as a result of that.
Now, you say you made over 1,000 contacts touching wires together. What kind of contacts were those? Was that 40-meter CW?
It was like 40-meter CW, but they were limited to like a crystal. So when you made a contact back in the day, you sent CQ, let's say, on 7025, and then you listen from 7025, you listen 7040 or 7030, anywhere along the band to make the contacts. It wasn't just like they were going to transmit right on your frequency back in the old days.
What's your favorite operating mode now?
Right now, I'm enjoying FT8. I've made 25,000 contacts on FT8 since last August, which is pretty monumental. I do a lot of sideband in the morning. I run a group on 7163 every morning and work DX, and I do a lot of CW as well. So it's a mixture. My current speed is about 50 words a minute. Good copy.
Now, 7163 has a website, doesn't it?
Right, 7163net.com. And it displays some of it's more of a visual sort of website. It displays the people that have come, DX that have come to our sites, DX expeditions that we've gone on, and other useful information.
I see. So this is a larger group. It's not just a traffic net on a single sideband. It's actually a group that does things together and goes places?
Yes, we do DX expeditions. We have a yearly party over in Orlando at the Hamvention each year. We have 150 members right now, and it's a very nice, organized, congenial group. We don't deal with politics or anything like that. It's a matter of DX and amateur radio. We avoid any topics that are disturbing to others.
Sounds great. Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Yeah, it's kind of funny that at the age of 11, getting into radio, it allowed me to be exposed to different people of different ages and occupations. At the time, I talked to Barry Goldwater when he was a senator and ran for president, and Gene Shepard from WOR in New York, and got to know these guys as an 11-year-old and functioned with them at meetings and dinners and things like that. And as a result, it improved my communication skills. And when it came to choosing occupation, I chose the side of dealing with people than the side of dealing with electronics, because that was really my true interest. So it's really my hobby of ham radio got me into my profession as a psychologist.
Now, you're a world traveler, having gone to over 72 countries in your life. That's what I read someplace. You mentioned to me in an email that you have operated ham radio from the island of Cuba, both from the Havana side and the American-controlled Guantanamo Bay. How did travel and working in exotic places start for you?
Well, I started, my parents were world travelers as well, so I got the bug then. My first trip, DX trip, was when I was 17 years old. I traveled alone to Spain, to Balearic Islands, and to North Africa, to Algeria, and got to do a little bit of operating on that trip. So that's my first trip alone. After that, I traveled to Europe twice, backpacking by myself, sleeping on beaches and in train cars. I operated on that trip, one of those trips, 4U1ITU in Geneva, and got to meet hams in different parts of the world, especially Europe at that point. so that those two trips to Europe by backpacking, and then follow-up trips in 1991. I was one of the few Americans that was allowed to operate out of communist Russia under the call WB2REM Portable UA6 Lima. That took a little bit of doing. K1ZZ intervened for me in 1991 to help get permission to operate from there, and it was very successful. Although I had a little bit of dealings with the KGB on that trip, you can understand given what I was doing there. But I one story about that. I remember, we were drinking an awful lot of vodka on that 1991 trip, and so one morning I got up. My host RA6LUX was sleeping still. He was from the city of Rostov-on-the-Don, and I went on 20 meters early in the morning with his radio, which only would operate upside down. It was homebrew, which in Russian is called samodelny. And so I was operating his radio upside down, and I was on 14080, and I heard these really loud Russian stations. I can't remember the exact call. It was something like R6A or something like that. And that was an unusual call back in the 1990s. They didn't have those abbreviated calls. So I said, I'll give the guy a call in Russian. So I gave him a call in Russian, and he came back and he gave me a report in Russian, and that was it. And then when my friend woke up in the morning, I said, I just worked R6A on 14080. Oh, Jim, he said, Jimmy, 14080 is out of our band. That was the Russian FCC you talked to. So that was my experience.
Did they give you a ticket?
No. Gave me a pass, I guess.
What's the most exotic place that you've operated ham radio?
Exotic. I was just last September, I barely made it to it given the hurricanes around here in Florida, to operate it for the second time from the Galapagos Islands. And it was a trek to get down there and operate. I'm sure not like some of the other places, but for me, I had to go to Bogota, and Bogota to Quito, fly over to Baltra Island in the Galapagos, and then take a really wild boat ride over to Isabella Island. And there was a group of us from the 716 group that went there, including a YL, KG0YL, and a number of other people. And it was a very interesting trip. The roads are still made out, sand roads, and there's tortoises walking around, and flamingos, and a lot of interesting wildlife. And we were able to operate the radio in shifts of two people, and then the other people were able to go out and explore the island. Nancy, KG0, and YL, and myself climbed the volcano and did a 14-mile hike while the other were operating. And some went up and took pictures of the tortoises, or we went out to see the sea lions and things like that. So that's an interesting trip. That was the second time that I went to the Galapagos. The first time was a little bit unusual, and it involved a honeymoon DX expedition in 1981. I went to Santa Cruz Island, the Galapagos, and I'm still hearing about that from my wife. We're still married. It's almost 40 years later, but I operated from there, and then subsequently on our 25th anniversary, a DX honeymoon, second honeymoon DX expedition to Bora Bora and Tahiti.
But it doesn't sound to me like she objected too much. She went along.
She went along, but as I said, I'm still hearing about it.
What's the biggest takeaway from your world travels? What have you learned?
What I've learned, and let me go back to Cuba, because we didn't really fully touch on that Cuba thing. First of all, we had an invitation to go to Guantanamo Bay by ex-military, myself and Nancy and another guy. Guantanamo Bay is somewhat of a restricted area, as you can imagine, and we operated from there. They have a club station there with 3 operating positions. Each person is assigned to their own call. But I remember one day we did bring a satellite, like a walkie-talkie and satellite antennas, and the only place we really could do it is to go out into the main parking lot of Guantanamo Bay, where the airport is on one side of the island, one side of Guantanamo Bay, and the base is on the other. So they had to cross over the bay there to get to the housing area and the offices. And we set up our satellite station in the parking lot there where the boats come across. you can imagine we have a walkie-talkie and a 5-element beam, and we're pointing it up in the sky over Guantanamo Bay, and who pulls up behind us is two MPs, and I went over there very quickly to explain what we're doing, because I can understand how that made them feel nervous. But so and Guantanamo Bay was a very interesting experience, but I really had an urge to see Cuba. My parents' honeymoon there in 1948, and I had an urge, but given the political situation and that sort of thing, I thought it might be impossible. But what I did was, after Guantanamo that same year, I wrote an email to every Cuban ham that I worked in Havana over the last 10 years, and was lucky to run across CO2KL, Roberto, who came back to me, who was high up in their club, and was helped to arrange the trip of a group of 9 of us or 10 of us to Cuba, and was the first Cuban USDX expedition it was an expedition. We had a presentation, we had a kids meeting, we visited their club. It was a great time. And what my takeaway of this is that people say, well, how could you take Cuba or whatever, or the political situation. Wherever I go, whatever their political situation, whatever their philosophies are, it fits for them, for their country. There's no reason for me to interpret, to evaluate what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And that's my success in going to these countries, is that, Cuba has many good things about their system that works well for them, and the things that don't. And the same thing here in the U.S. So I can't really criticize them. I would have to criticize ourselves,
In a place like Cuba, where you still see the 57 Chevrolet driving around, and if you're a car collector, you probably wish you could go to Cuba and bring one back.
They have laws against that, actually.
I'm sure they do. What is the state of amateur radio equipment in Cuba? Are Cuban hams, are they big builders? Do they have old stuff that was like pre-Castro, like the cars?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of topics on there, but to give you an idea, we operated T42 US. We brought the radios, the ICOM 706s. They brought the amplifiers, which were the Kenwood. Oh man, so I've lost it. What's the Kenwood amplifier? Older one.
Probably the FL2100. That looks like it's about 30 years old, with some big Russian tubes in it.
So the Cubans had 2 amplifiers, FL2100s, that they acquired through. It was used by the military in Angola during the war in Angola, where the Cuban troops were involved, and so they received these surplus amplifiers to use, which were all rusted out because they were used in the jungle. So the whole outsides of them were rusted, but they worked okay. And when they broke down, these Cubans were right on it, and they could just tear it apart, open it up, fix it, and have it back on the air in 10 minutes. And I found the same way with the Russians when I was over there, that they were very good with making do with what they had. So a lot of their equipment is older equipment. I know Roberto, CO2KL, has a modern ICOM radio. It's a marine ICOM radio. And the way he acquired that is that there was a sailboat that sunk off the coast of Cuba. And a company came in and bought the boat up after about 3 or 4 days, and this radio was underwater for 3 or 4 days, and so he bought it for like pennies on the dollar, and put it out in the sun for a couple of days, turned it on, and it worked, and that's his radio.
Did you leave the ICOMs in Cuba?
No, there's a law about leaving transmitters down there. That everything that we brought in had to be documented and then brought out and checked off. So it was a little unusual bringing transmitters into Cuba. Luckily, we had the support of the government with it, and otherwise it could have been a problem.
And now this quick timeout from ICOM America. Spring is in the air, and now is the time to check out ICOM's line of D-Star radios, where you can stay connected in your neighborhood or around the world. This week, we highlight the UHF band ID31A+. It's ICOM's newest D-Star entry-level handheld, and it's ready for the season ahead. Lightweight, compact, and tough, the new ID31A+ is a great choice for any shack or out in those harsh environments. This dual-mode analog and digital portable includes an integrated GPS receiver for geolocation and DPRS, a modem and terminal mode for transceiving data when connected to an Android smartphone, and the ID31A Plus can become a D-Star hotspot in access point mode when connected to a PC or smartphone. With an IPX7 waterproof rating, the ID31A Plus should be in your Go Kit or backup portable. The ID31A Plus is an ideal radio to use with a low-power hotspot to stay connected when you're on the road or out of range of your D-Star repeater. Check out ICOM's complete line of D-Star, VHF, UHF, and dual-band transceivers at www.icomamerica.com/amateur, and be sure to visit the ICOM America booth in Building 2 at the Dayton Hamvention at the end of May. And when you do, tell them at ICOM that you heard it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO Today. What was your most challenging expedition, and what happened?
Well, I can tell you that I had the most challenging DX expedition earlier this last month, March. I was operating Hotel 72 Delta X-ray from Nicaragua, and Nicaragua is an interesting country. They're still, the government is Sandinista, and the old leader is back in charge now of the country. And when we came into Nicaragua, our suitcases were put through a metal detector, and immediately they saw our radio, our 706 that we brought down. We're going to use for FT8. And they immediately took the radio away, told us we had to come back the next day to the customs house and retrieve the radio. Well, this was a day out of radio hell that you can imagine. I had to go to this customs house. They wouldn't let my friend who speaks Spanish extremely fluently in to help, YN2N. And I was in there for 10 hours trying to negotiate the radio back in the heat, and the efficiency level was kind of low for 10 hours to try to get the radio back, and finally it cost me about $150 to retrieve it. So that was one of my more frustrating moments, second day in a country, spending 10 hours in a customs house.
And this is after you actually have an operating license to operate.
Exactly. We showed them the license. It didn't matter. And there were other people in there that had hair dryers that they pulled off to the side that they were charging them money for. So it seemed to be another reason behind it.
Did you get your $150 back when you left?
No. I told them that we were taking the radio in and bringing it back, and that I would check it, but it didn't matter.
You were active in bringing a live contact from the space stations, including the Mir, to a school where your daughter attended. How did that start, and how important are these demonstrations to advancing ham radio?
I think they brought a lot of excitement to the radio, to the children at the school, for sure. They geared up for it, and it was a challenging experience for them and for me. When we had our CEREX mission at a middle school in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, there were approximately 400 attendees and maybe about 5 news stations. And I remember it was in the middle of the summer, so people had to come back, and the auditorium, the gym was extremely hot to start with. And the schedule came up, and I started calling the space shuttle at the time, and nobody came back. And then another minute went by, and this is like a 10-minute pass, and another minute by, and nobody came back. And here I have these news reporters and the TV cameras, and 3 minutes go by, and nobody comes back. And finally, at the 4th minute, they came back, and we did the contact, but it was extremely scary, but very rewarding. The kids, I'm sure, will remember for the rest of their life. And in addition, the commander of the shuttle at the time was a Princeton University graduate, which is the next town near us, from Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And when he got back, he invited the students that talked to him up to Princeton University to meet him in person. So that was a really fulfilling experience for them. The Mir space station, when it was around, that was basically, I had learned Russian, and after a while, some of the cosmonauts, when they came overhead, would call me in Russian, which was an exciting experience.
You've written a number of articles on Internet linking in both 73 and QST magazines. What do you mean by internet linking, and what are you linking today? But I think maybe let's break that question down. What do you mean by internet linking when you started, and does that mean something different today?
Well, it's advanced quite a bit. The internet linking aspect of it. We used iLink was the initial platform developed by Graham Barnes in England, and then Jonathan Taylor took over Echolink, took over the platform, the iLink platform, and developed Echolink. It's sort of like the outside of the iLink platform. And just sort of a cover for it, which made it easier to use. So that was the first thing, where you used a radio to go through the internet and then come out on a repeater or a simplex link on some other part of the world and talk to somebody, let's say, in their car. So that was the first part. I did a different type of linking earlier on, which was linking between UHF or VHF and HF radio. And that was one of my first projects. That was probably the time at which I talked to earlier about my brother saying that basically I was his gopher, and he did the work and I did the gophering around and operating. And at that point, I decided that there's things that I probably could do, and I developed something called the Missing Link in '73 magazine. That was my first article in 1986. Working with linking, and that was a simplex link where somebody could come on a simplex frequency where there was like a click every second, and that click was a window, like a 10 or 15 millisecond window, allowed transmission to come in, so I could do it on one frequency. And that was my first dealings with linking. I even had it on CW as well. I would use in future years, I would use a touchtone encoder and send touchtones, which then were translated into CW. Had it click a relay and then it sends CW that way. It was later on in 1995 that I developed a WB2REM OTE link. And that was published the first time that QST published an article on remote linking was in 1995. And a subsequent article on internet linking. And then that subsequent article on internet linking was picked up by Dave Cameron. And as a result of that, I think it was in 1998 or so, or 1997, Dave Cameron developed IRLP as a result of reading my article. So I'm sort of proud of that part of it. As far as the electronics and the interneting linking go, as I said, I had no experience with electronics other than being a gopher. And I started to take, just to give you an idea, small circuitry. Like I would go on the radio and I'd ask somebody, how do you make a touchtone decoder? How do you make a latch circuit? And I would write it down on a napkin or a piece of paper. And I had 100 pieces of paper with all these little circuits. And I put it together, and in the end, it was a 2-page schematic in QST magazine, 1995, and I had never done an electronic project like that before.
Are you operating remote control now? Is your station a remotely controllable station? Yes,
in a number of ways. But this right now, it's so much easier to go remote. There are different software. One is free, and I suggest anybody that if they can to go out and try it. It's you need a Windows computer or Android phone. Is the Remote Hams program, remotehams.com. And there's other ones available as well, but I like Remote Hams because it's free and it's easy to set up. And I think it's there's an app for your phone for about $10. You can use it on your Android phone as well, and you can stay in touch wherever you are. My radios are all remotable and easy access. I've operated my radio when I was in Cuba. I could operate back going back, and so it has a lot of advantage for people that are in nursing homes and places like that. The older hams, that if they want to get on the air, they can use the remote hams software to transmit and to receive. I do have an article I published with K5PA Gene in April of 2017 in QST. It won the Cover Plaque Award for QST, and that was on the Remote Hams program.
Okay, so for those people that haven't seen the article, if somebody's in a nursing home, then he may not have a station anymore. Does remote hams, do those members share their stations with other remote hams members?
Yes, and that's a good thing about it. Some of the platforms out there require people to buy into on a yearly basis. There's absolutely no fees here. When you come onto remote hams, it's like a lobby of, you see a listing of people, maybe 300 or 400. Now, initially, you might be able to connect into them and listen into the conversation, and then you just basically request permission to transmit, which sends an email to the or a note to the owner of the station, and he then can give you permission to transmit on the link, and that's how you can get in. So there's a lot of people that they'll give permission for people to transmit, even though they have no idea who they are. But they do check their license. There's a license checking facility within the program.
Well, now, you wrote an article about internet linking and the law. How does the United States differ, perhaps, from the rest of the world with regard to linking to remote ham stations? Each country has their own laws, as you probably know. But in the U.S., we had we couldn't get some people to define it exactly. So we had to really scrub the law to research what's allowed and what's not allowed. Our main concern was what happens when a person from another country comes on the link and operates your link. And those are the main concerns. And, what happens when someone from England comes on and operates my link? And, and what's the law behind that? So as far as each individual country, some countries don't even allow remote control linking, from what I understand. But here they do. But we only are allowed to let a person on our link and operate if we're talking to a person that we have third-party agreement with. Then they can talk. They can come on the link and talk as if they were in our shack. But if they come on and operate, and we're talking to a country, let's say China, where we don't have third-party agreement, they would not be allowed to talk to them. There are also issues that people right now are talking about, and that is DXCC. Can somebody come on my station and operate and get DXCC credit for a country they work through my station? And the law right now, as it states it, is that if they're in the United States, they can get credit for using my station. If they're out of the country, they cannot. Well, it seems to me that it is your station, with your call sign, right? If someone's using your station remotely, are they using their call sign coming out of your station?
They're using their call sign, and they're saying remote, but there's no legal obligation, which is surprising to me that they don't say through WB2REM's link. They just say operating remote. There's a shared responsibility in the transmission here in the U.S. between the control operator and the station licensee. The control operator is the person coming through the link. So I'm just a little bit hesitant in leaving my link unattended. I know some people that do and allow third-party people like that to come in and operate with not knowing exactly, you're taking for granted that they know what the rules are. And so I don't even give permission for some people that are outside of the operating area to use my link because of that.
You wrote an article that you lived and worked and did amateur radio on an Antarctic base. It's funny that probably in the last 10 episodes, I've had a couple of other hams also say they worked from Antarctica. Were you on an Antarctic base, and how long were you there?
No, I was not. And that's the crazy thing about that article. It was Life on an Antarctic Base, written by myself and Andre Phillips, a scientist down there, VP8 MAP. He was on Haley Base, British Antarctic Survey, and I was in New Jersey, and we were using PACSAT. That's satellite packet radio. So when the satellite would come over Antarctica, he would upload pictures and article content. And then when it came over New Jersey, the PACSAT would download the article through the satellite to my station automatically. And through that process, we wrote the first joint article that was written basically over PACSAT satellite.
Well, that's pretty cool. Are there any PACSAT satellites still operational?
I'm not sure. I haven't been on it for a long time, but I would hope, but I haven't heard about it.
Well, actually, I had never heard of a PACSAT satellite. That means that's like a store and forward kind of operation.
Yeah, it's like a packet, repeater up in space.
So it's running regular packet.
Something like that. It's 9600 baud, I think it was.
Oh, pretty cool. It won't download the message to somebody else unless they're KPC3, set for your call sign.
Right, exactly, and it was downloading pictures as well as text. So we wrote that together. He didn't have the capability of writing from down there, just the way it was, and then it got published, and then he was able to take it back to the British Antarctic Survey and then show it to them, and they were pleased with it. It was kind of a nice project.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. Now, we touched on the fact that your ham radio station is remotely controlled. What is the ham radio station at your QTH, and where is your QTH?
I'm located in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And I have an ICOM 7600 and a Maritron AL 1500. The nice thing about this radio and the secondary radio that I have a link on is the ICOM 7300 is that they both have USB sound card and CAT control. So all you have to do is plug the radio, the back of the radio or the front, depending on the rig, into the computer's USB port. And it automatically takes the audio from that and puts it right into the remote hams program. In order to run a server at your house for remote hams, it's also free and it's easy to set up. Basically, you it just has to open up 3 ports on your router, and that's it, and define your server. Maybe a half an hour job.
So what you're saying is that the 7300 and the 7600 can operate as a remote hams server?
No, they will operate with the server. Yeah, with the server, they will, and the computer and the remote hams program. It will open, the ports are open, allows the audio to pass in and out through the internet.
I see. So in other words, the way that's configured is you actually have the 2 radios connected by USB to your PC, and the PC is actually acting as the remote hams host.
Exactly.
I see. Well, that's pretty cool.
And it works under I have DSL here, and even with DSL and very slow speeds at times, it works well.
Well, I saw you have a video on your QRZ page where you have a drone flying over your QTH, and it looks like your Port St. Lucie is kind of rural, and I saw canals around your property. So does that mean you have alligators?
Yeah, that's true. It is true and not true about being rural. Where I am, I happen to pick a house that backs up on the Savannah State Forest. And the Savannah State Forest goes all the way to the ocean, just about, the Indian River and then the ocean, about 3 miles away. So what you were looking at is this whole state forest behind my house. I'm also in an area that's been designated an equestrian area. So I have horses all around me. You probably saw that in the video.
Also, yeah.
But if you go 3 miles on the other direction, you hit Route 1. It's as busy as any place you could be, like going up the coast. So it's a between being rural and being very urban, we just have a very great location here.
So I see. So before you go out and get the paper in the morning, do you look to see if there's anything parked on your front porch?
Park like what?
Like an alligator.
No, about the alligators. Well, we have a fence, but I've been told that the fence between the antenna, which is about 30 feet away from the canal where the alligators are, and there's a fence. I heard that they can climb over the fence and slither, but I had a guy over here, W4SLD, Jody, he was climbing my tower, and he was up there looking down. He said, Jim, look in the canal. There's an alligator right out there and right by you. And another guy was working, cleaning some of the shrub behind the fence, and the alligator almost bit him in the butt. So they're out there. I know a few Jack Russell Terriers have been meals.
We shouldn't laugh in case there are dog lovers out there.
Yeah, no, believe me, the guy was very upset.
I saw that you're connected to a website called iLinkBoards.com. What is iLinkBoards?
Well, it's a process of this whole thing in the beginning of EchoLink and iLink. there was no real interfaces available back in the 1990s. And so I was walking around the lake with my wife, and I said to her, I got a really stupid idea. If I buy a PIC programmer, I can program these PICs chips, which I know nothing about, and I can then, maybe make a board or something and use it for Echolink or iLink at the time. And I said, but I have to drop $100 on this thing. And, think we can afford it. We were pretty young then. She said, well, go for it. So I bought this PIC programmer, and I came across a guy in England that I met that joined up with me. He was an engineer, a wireless company, a G4CDY, Terry. And we built a board and put the thing together, and all said and done, we sold over 2,000 of them, 3 different models, and then ended up paying for my kids' college.
Is the product still relevant today?
Yes, the product's relevant, although there are other ones that have built-in sound cards like the Tiger Electronics Signal Link. But I'm still getting people order. I'm selling them as kits now, so it's something fun for them to build. But the technology is a little bit more advanced at this point. And the good thing about the 7300 is that, unlike the 7600, you can't remotely turn it on, which is a problem when you're away. The 7300 you can, so you can just go on there from clear off and hit the software and it'll bring it on. So what I had to do was use a remote switch to turn the 7600 on through a IP switch, and then I could turn the power to the radio on that way, and that's how I got around that.
If you go on eBay, you'll find those IP switches pretty cheap and ubiquitous now.
Right, and so that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to get the 7300 to be able to remotely turn it on. I didn't want to have to rely on my wife to come in the room and turn it on, that sort of thing when I'm not there.
Or reboot the whole mechanism if it gets hung up.
Right.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Well, ICOM's a sponsor of the QSO Today podcast, so they'll
great
be grateful.
I love it, and I'll say that I love ICOM radios. So.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that there are a number of ham radio manufacturers. I think it's interesting that Flex Radio started with a computer interface, but their new radios have knobs, and I think as far as the user experience goes, I think people like knobs. Hams like knobs.
Yeah, I mean the 7300, it's nice. Yeah, it's nice, and you can say, but yeah, I do like it. The 7600, it's with those knobs, it does help me a little bit operate. But you got to embrace technology, and I'm sure I'm going to embrace it.
Well, do you enjoy the visual, the waterfall displays and things like this when you're operating?
Yeah, they're very nice. I mean, we have it on the computer when you use FT8 and that sort of thing, the same sort. But the 7300 has a nice oscilloscope sort of window, and also you can see digital signals as well. And that gives you a feel of the old days when you used to use oscilloscopes with radios. Incidentally, this headset, I don't know how it sounds, but this is a headset that was in the article in QST in April. The good thing about this headset, let me see. Alexa, turn on radios.
Okay.
She's turning on the radio. Then she turned on the radios too. Alexa, stop radio. That's the problem with the two words together.
Uh-huh.
So the radios come on remotely like that too. I can turn them on.
Oh, well, I have an Alexa sitting here. I haven't plugged it in yet. I've had it for a couple months.
We use it all. I use it for everything in this house, just about.
Is that right? Do you have a lot of home automation?
Yeah, TV comes on that way. The lights and all the lights in the house, all dim and everything. See what else I have with that.
Are you using dimmable bulbs and stuff?
No, you get the Hue, Philips Hue. And I just got one that's a light strip that has all these little LEDs, little squares built into a strip, and you put it underneath a counter, and it'll change all the colors and do the whole thing. You can command it to go red or whatever. And it's underneath the counter where the light is really put.
Your Internet of Things devices in your house are decentralized. You didn't home run wire all the electric plugs in your house.
No, everything is. What I did was the bulbs themselves have a receiver in them, so you don't have to hook them to anything. So what I was telling you before is that right now, let me see what I can do here. If I can. Okay, right, you there?
Yeah.
Okay, watch this.
Can we have you on LCA? Yeah, okay, Dick. Yeah, no trouble, mate. That's all right. That's fine.
What was that?
You can maybe, if you have a camera, you can show me your headset. Is that the one that has the push-to-talk button on the side? The modified Plantronics?
Yeah, it's Plantronics. It's now the CS720. This has a 350 foot range.
Wow, that's open field range,
it's at 1.9 gigahertz.
Oh yeah, okay. There's the charger transmitter.
Okay, but you see the top. You see the two top lights.
Right. I see.
One's the Skype and one's the radio. And if you push the two of them together down, you can merge any two audio sources.
Really?
Yeah. This is the newer version of this. So you read the article in QST in April. It's on my QRZ page. But if you substitute the base for a WO2 base from what's in the article, nothing else changes. All you have here is the back of it. There's a RJ45.
Right.
This goes to the microphone of the radio. All right, and we have a remote push to talk here too.
Oh yeah, cool. Okay.
And that has a 200-foot range. And I have a box here. I can't move it over here. Maybe I can. Hold on. A little switch box that goes to the push to talk that has a relay inside of it that will either you can operate Vox or you can walk away. Let's see, all right, if I can get on here. You can hear it click, maybe.
Oh yeah, cool.
Hear it? When I push the button, it's clicking. That's just putting the radio into transmit.
So you can walk around your property.
Anywhere, yeah.
Looking for gators and talk on the radio. And can you change the channel? You can use your smartphone to move up and down the band?
Not necessarily, not now. No, that's one thing you can't do, I don't think. But let me see here. Get this off here.
It seems to me if you have an Android interface for the radios or for the ham link, that you should be able to actually control the radio while you're walking around.
You probably could. I'm not sure. I have to think about that. But it has great range. So you might want to look into it. This is an easier project than some of the other ones. It's just a matter of modifying the cable for this WO2. And with what you're doing here with the broadcasting and stuff, you might have some advantage to it somehow. I don't know.
Now, you mentioned to me that you have a new product that you've designed and will be announced in the ham radio magazines called the Cell Patch. What is the Cell Patch?
Okay, it's not a product for people to buy per se. It's not something that we're selling, but it's a project, yeah.
Okay.
And this project is coming out later in QST. It involves I was involved in the hurricanes last summer, and I started talking to some people in Puerto Rico, and one guy in particular kind of stimulated my interest. He had just gotten a kit, an SDR kit, the day before the hurricane, and the hurricane came and he lost all his power. And so he, in an innovative way, took a nail with a pliers and a lighter, and heated up the nail and soldered his SDR kit, the small transceiver, with a nail, and came on the air to talk to us that day, and had me contact his daughter in New York, who then arranged through that call airfare out of Ponce, Puerto Rico, to go back to New York. And I got thinking, I was relaying the message, you know what, I don't have a phone patch anymore. There's no landlines. There has to be a way of doing a cell patch, a cell phone patch. And so myself and K5PA designed a easy-to-use, cheap, everybody could put it together, a cell patch so that in future emergencies it's something that will be available. I believe in those sort of practical things in the ham radio.
Do you operate in the field, other than going on de-expeditions where you take your own equipment? Do you operate in the field around Florida where you live?
I've operated field day, and I've also operated a maritime mobile out off the coast here. There's some rare grids that we've operated out there as well. So I've done some different things like that. I was a pilot. I am a pilot. And in my young and stupid days, I remember taking an Atlas 210 up with me, a 210X up with me. I don't know if you remember that radio. It was one of the first transistor radios. And I took a 20-meter antenna, and I put a dipole from the tail tie down to the wing tie downs, and the coax inside. And one of the times, and I'm a young pilot, so it wasn't a smart move, but one of the times I plugged into the Cessna, this Atlas 210X. And it says, and the 210X lit up like a light bulb. And I unplugged it and started smoking. And I said, oh, my God, what's going on here? And as it turns out, that plane had 18 volts or something like 24 volts. Had 24 volts, and it just about smoked the radio. But that's one of my flying experiences.
Well, that Atlas 210, as I recall, didn't that have a base for the radio to slide in where it had the power supply and the speaker? Was that the 210?
That was a 210, yeah, 210X.
Yeah, it was a clever idea. Unfortunately, I don't think the Atlas radio company lasted very long.
No, they didn't. But it was a great, portable radio at the time, and that's what I took with me on my first trip to the Galapagos, and worked out well there. 1,500 contacts.
Yeah, this is like circa 1974. So at the time for an HF radio, that was pretty small.
And this was 1981 when I took it with me.
I often ask my guests how ham radio affects their family life. However, in your case, it seems that you've made a number of family members ham radio operators. What are the elements of your success in this area?
Well, either join them or
Well, if I beat them or join them.
Yeah, that's it, I guess. But my wife is K2MGR, and my son is W2REM, and my mother was a ham, and my brother's a ham. So, but I'm really the one that's really the most active. They tolerate me. They know my quirks and my habits, and they have to pull me off the radio. They do, and they call it an addiction, I think.
Well, you've been quite successful schlepping your wife out on these expeditions or to exotic places to operate ham radio. And now you said earlier that you still hear about it, but hopefully you're hearing good things about it.
Yeah, there's a benefit, there's a disadvantage. She gets the both. When we go there, I usually know people in these countries, and she gets to meet the people and then get to know their wives. And she's very friendly with my friend in Cuba's wife, and so she gets to know a lot of people. But she doesn't like the time, and that's probably a common theme among all hams, is that they don't like the time away from them. You love the radio more than you love, that sort of thing. I don't get into it. As a psychologist, I should be better about it.
Do you have a favorite contest?
I like the CQ Worldwide DX contest in October. I've operated that from different locations, Costa Rica and Cuba, and I like that contest. I used to like the sweepstakes. It's just a little bit too long an exchange for me, but it's good practice for people for emergencies. I've been involved in emergency situations like the Mexican earthquake, where traffic handling is very important. You got to be on your toes to do that, and I think those contests help for that, especially with long exchanges.
What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now?
Well, what's exciting me right now, not to be repetitious, is FT8. Some people say it's a little slow, but to me, it's a wave of the future in some ways. It's the robotic action of it, less typing and more your station making the contact. And I see the future a little differently than other people, and I saw the future differently with internet linking, where I caught a lot of grief about people saying that's not ham radio, and now the people are saying that FT8 is a little bit off, from the normal. But to me, that's what excites me about ham radio. I mean, I see it going in a future. The people today, the kids today, are not interested in much as talking to people as they are texting and whatever, emailing. They rarely get on the phone and talk. Even my own kids. And I'm thinking that this is the future, and what's going to happen in the ham bands when people are not talking anymore. They're just texting, and not to say that's not going to happen, but so ham radio has to adapt to the future, and the future to me may be involved, one aspect of it, the development of robots of some sort, and the use of robots to help make contacts in some ways, competitions. I mean, I think you see where I'm going with this. I'm not saying that not the traditional ham radio should be practicing of talking to people. I enjoy people, CW, the other things, but there also should be an experimental field where robots are involved in communications. And that's one area I see as a future.
But FT8 is not a contest mode, right?
No, but it's a mode that you make one contact after another without really a personalized. You might say hi, John, or something at the end of a contact, but it's a very standard exchange.
Do you use software specifically for FT8 that works with your logging software?
Yes, there's a number of programs. Anybody that's involved or wants to get involved, WSJTX-X is the main program for FT8. That's done by Joe Taylor. He is a guy that won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He developed the WSJTX. And then there's a supplemental program called JT Alert. It can be found on Ham Apps with a S at the end .com, HAMAPPS.com, and you can get JT Alert there. That sort of that helps you make the contacts by showing you who's calling CQ, and you can click a box. A couple other things. I use AC Log, which integrates with JT Alert, which automatically logs a contact, and Dimension 4, which is a timing program because your computer has to be within 1 second of everybody else's computer around the world.
Okay, so Dimension 4 is then what, polling the internet for the time? Exact time.
I usually go to 0.0011 of a second, usually.
So you're running those 4 programs on your PC, and then you're connected to either of your 2 rigs using the USB?
Yes, and the 7300 is easy because it has a memory of the pattern you use for the controls that you use for FT8. So I can just go to the SD card and pull that up, and it automatically goes to the exact controls.
Do you QSL still? QSL?
Yeah, I don't. I QSL direct, and which I do 100%. And I believe when I go on a DX expedition, one of my philosophies is that I want to have cards waiting to be, my cards to be ready to be filled out and sent out when the cards come in, and I want those cards to get to the people within sent out within 24 hours, because I think the reflection of your DX expedition is one of the things is how fast you can get the QSL cards out. One of my pet peeves is getting QSL cards without envelopes specifically, and even without envelopes or anything, and then I have 155,000 contacts in my log. I've made over 30,000 contacts this year, and you can imagine the cost of responding QSL cards if everybody sent one. So I do LOTW, I do EQSL, I do direct, as long as they send a SAIT. That's where I'm at with that. Yeah, I enjoy QSL cards.
For your physical QSL cards, do you use some kind of service to prepare them and mail them?
Yeah, I use no, I don't use a service to prepare them. I do it all myself for all the DX expeditions, everything. I just think it's more efficient that way.
What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
I would say, embrace what's happening right now. Get involved with your radio clubs to see what's going on there. Use some of the new technology. Get involved with the digital technology. Learn CW, even though you don't have to do it. I know a lot of my friends are doing that now, and it's a really fun mode. And I'd say, that it's not the radio it used to be. It's just from my own profession as a psychologist, the psychology of amateur radio has changed over the years. Maybe it's coming back a little bit now, but whatever society is, the radio seems to be reflecting society and the way people treat each other, and I see that on the air. That's why in my group, it's a rule that people have to treat people nicely and respectfully, and I see a lot of that respect, cursing and other things like that going on the band, and kind of disgust me. So I'd suggest to the new hams to avoid those situations, to not look at that, but to look at what they value in the radio, and to ignore this sort of thing. I don't know if you saw in my articles, I wrote 2 articles related to my profession. I never published in psychology, but I published in amateur radio psychology, and I have one article called The Psychology of the QRMer, and another one called the DX Cop Protector or Offender. And those are 2 articles related to my profession and ham radio. They were in CQ magazine.
For those of us who've heard QRMers through the last 50 years, is there a psychology to QRMers? And what is it?
Yes, I think the main one is attention. That's obvious. That they're trying to get your attention, and like anything, like a kid or like as soon as you respond to the attention, you're reinforcing them, and they're going to come back and get you. So it's very hard not to respond. I'm even guilty of that. I've had situations where they push me to the point where I respond on occasion, but. You have to understand what's behind it. One of the things, let's say for a DX expedition, if you start calling specific areas, like calling for North America or calling for Europe, you're ticking off that other part of the world. So my belief is that instead of doing that, which I'm seeing this DX expedition that's on now from St. Brendan, they're not calling as much directional, but just calling whatever they're open. Because when you start leaving people out, then you start offending those people, and then they start QRMing me because they're angry. So anger is another one. Intoxication, drugs, and that sort of thing. People are coming on, whipping it up at night and come on the radio and losing their inhibition. I'm not sure else where I've.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I've heard them through the years, and it surprises me. I know oftentimes the advice is to spin the dial and just move on and not give them an audience.
Yeah, I've had people do that with me too, and I'll spin the dial, and then I'll play a game with them because I'll spin the dial, then they go after me, and they find me 10 kcs up or down. So some people are intent to QRM, and those people you just can't. At that point, you just turn it off the van or you ignore them if you can. But it's not a large problem anymore. I mean, there's a problem there, and again, it's a reflection. Some of it is a reflection of society, what people can do in society and get away with it these days, where they couldn't do that before. It's the same sort of testing of limits on the radio, what curse word they can use. It's just not a place on ham radio for that sort of stuff. And then again, I also encourage, and I am respectful to whoever I talk to, and try to get to know the people as well, and not just ham radio stuff. That's another thing that I do with radio is I try to go deep, and maybe it's my profession, but I don't like just the surface conversation.
Are you still linking on VHF or UHF? Are you on DMR?
I'm not on DMR as of yet, but that's something I like to go to in the future. It's just a matter of time of operating. But I do have I think it was a DMR repeater close by to me, actually.
Yeah, I just got on DMR myself. I just bought a mobile because what I'm finding is that DMR seems to cover, the Jerusalem areas, a lot of hills, and where things don't normally seem to work, DMR just seems to work. So,
yeah, it's a good mode.
Yeah, it's any of those modes
good. Yep.
Jim, thanks so much for joining me on QSO today. It was quite interesting, and I hope that at some point when you travel again, you'll come to Israel, and we'll show you our beautiful country here.
That would be great. I'd love to do that.
And with that, I'm going to wish you 73.
73, Eric. Thank you.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Jim. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in WB2REM in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of QSO Today. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links on the show notes pages or by using QSO Today in coupon box at the checkout. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing on the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes pages. I'm grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio and in the iTunes Store, and now a host of podcast services and applications. Stitcher is still my favorite, with over 4,000 hours of listening time on mine. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.